Have you ever thought about what heaven feels when two people, married on earth, both make it there together? Does paradise celebrate differently when a husband saves his wife's soul, or when a wife pulls her husband back from the edge? And if marriage is supposed to be a path to holiness, what does that actually look like when one spouse is standing at the gates and looking back for the other? Throughout Christian history, saints have written about marriage as a sacrament, a lifeline, a battlefield. But few ever saw what heaven itself feels when the battle is won by both. Saint Teresa of Ávila was one of the rare ones given that sight. She did not just write theology, she saw it happen. By 1562, she founded her first reformed monastery in Ávila. 50 years of religious life, 17 convoys founded across Spain, 454 letters preserved in archives, thousands of hours in prayer. And in those hours, God showed her things most people never see. If you value documented history from the lives of the saints like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you are hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Teresa's own autobiography, The Life of Teresa of Jesus, completed in 1565 and held in the Escorial manuscript, and the interior castle, written in 1577 in Toledo under direct order from her confessor, Father Gratian. These are not summaries. These are her own words, cross-referenced with the testimonies gathered during her beatification process that began in 1592, just 10 years after her death. Now back to the information. The letter is dated 1680, though Teresa had died in 1582. The date is disputed. Some scholars place it in 1579 based on internal references to a plague that swept through Salamanca that year, killing hundreds in 3 months. Between them, a gulf Teresa described as wider than the distance from earth to the first heaven. The man's soul was dark, not black. Dark like iron that has been in a fire but cooled without being shaped. The woman's soul was bright but trembling. Being told, the judgment was happening, real, immediate, irreversible unless mercy intervened. Comfortable, not rich, not poor, ordinary. Fever. It came fast in 1576, during the summer heat. Seville's records show unusual mortality that year. Over 200 deaths in 6 weeks. He was one of them. He died in 4 days. No priest, no sacrament. His wife found him in the morning, already cold. Every single night before bed, she prayed one Hail Mary for her husband's soul. She did not know why. She was not educated. She could not read. But her mother had told her, if you love someone, you ask Our Lady to keep them. So she did. Each thread corresponded to one prayer. Teresa counted them later in her account. She saw thousands, maybe 10,000, 20 years of nightly prayers, 7,300 minimum. But the wife had prayed more than that. Sometimes twice a day. Sometimes when she woke in the night, worried. Sometimes when he came home angry. Teresa understood that the color showed the intensity of love behind each prayer. The gold ones were pure intercession. The silver ones were mixed with fear. The white ones were desperation. Every coldness. Every missed chance. But the threads gave him one moment. One single moment where he could choose. And in that moment, the mercy of God met the intercession of his wife, and he said yes. But he was going to be saved. And the woman, his wife, would see him again. She could not identify the melody, but she wrote that it was not like church hymns. It was simpler, like a mother humming to a child she thought she had lost. The entire vision lasted no more than a minute. But when it ended, Teresa was weeping so hard she could not stand. The man had been saved by mercy. The woman had become a partner in the work of salvation. And those are not the same thing. And marriage, Teresa said, is the closest, most daily, most painful form of that communion. He let her live as she wanted because he did not want conflict. And when she died in unrepentant sin, he was saved, but he was alone. The contrast between the two visions is brutal. One spouse prayed without ceasing, the other loved without acting. One brought her husband into eternity, the other lost his wife to it. And the difference was not intelligence or education or even virtue. It was perseverance in small things. In every single one, she instituted a practice she called the apostolate of intercession. Every nun was assigned a list of souls to pray for, not random souls, specific people, names, families, married couples. She told her sisters that their prayers could tip the scales in battles they would never see. By 1565, there were 13. By 1570, 21. Each nun carried a small leather notebook. Inside, names written in ink, married couples in crisis, men tempted to abandon their wives, women considering leaving the faith, children who had stopped speaking to their parents. Every name represented a soul at war. When a husband returned to the sacraments, she recorded the date. When a wife started daily prayer, she marked it down. This was not sentimental devotion. This was spiritual warfare documented like a military campaign. Improvement meant confession, reconciliation, return to Mass, or peaceful death with sacraments. That is a 56% success rate. Teresa considered it proof that persistent prayer worked. But that does not mean you stop praying. It means you pray harder. 12 of the husbands converted from lapsed faith to active practice. 8 of the wives entered deeper prayer lives. 3 couples both died within a year of each other, and, according to later testimony from their families, both died with the sacraments. They are daily mass, nightly prayer, small sacrifices, and the willingness to suffer for the other without keeping score. But do not abandon him unless he tries to kill you or damn your soul. Because if you leave, who will fight for him? 1 Hail Mary, 50 words, 30 seconds, for 20 years. That is 7,300 Hail Marys, and every single one counted. Alison Pierce in 1946, the 3-volume critical edition that includes her letters and the collected works of Saint Teresa of Ávila, translated by Kieran Kavanagh and Otilio Rodriguez, published by the Institute of Carmelite Studies in 1976. These are the standard scholarly editions used by historians and theologians worldwide. Now back to the information. She was 67. Her body was exhumed 9 months later and found incorrupt. Her heart was later removed and survives to this day in a reliquary in the Carmelite convent in Alba de Tormes. Examinations in 1914, 1931, and 1965 confirmed the preservation. No embalming, no explanation. They spread through her letters, her confessors, her nuns, and eventually through her canonization process. She was canonized in 1622 by Pope Gregory XV, just 40 years after her death. Unusually fast. The cause was pushed by King Philip III of Spain, who attributed his own marriage's survival to prayers inspired by Teresa's writings. Court records show they lived in different palaces for 2 years. Divorce was not possible, but abandonment was real. Then Margaret read Teresa's interior castle. She began praying the way Teresa described. 1 year later, Philip returned. They reconciled. They had 5 more children. When Margaret died in 1611, Philip ordered that Teresa's writings be distributed to every married couple in the Spanish nobility. That distribution is documented in the Royal Archives in Simancas. Over 400 copies of the interior castle were hand-copied and sent out between 1612 and 1615. The cost was charged to the royal treasury, 1,400 ducats. That is roughly $50,000 in modern value. It is a battlefield where eternity is decided, and the side that prays harder wins. The earliest known printed reference appears in a sermon collection by Jesuit Father Juan Eusebio Nierenberg, published in Madrid in 1631. The book, Diferencia entre lo temporal y eterno, includes a chapter on marriage where he retells Teresa's vision, almost word for word. The book went through 12 editions by 1680, over 15,000 copies sold. It was translated into Latin, French, Italian, and German. Each translation spread the story further. In France, it reached the circle of Saint Francis de Sales and Saint Jean de Chantal. Francis referenced it in a letter to a married couple in Annecy in 1609. The letter survives in the archives of the Visitation Order. He told them that prayer for a spouse was not optional, it was warfare. And he quoted Teresa directly, "If you love someone, you fight for their soul." In Poland, the story reached the royal court. Queen Cecilia Renata, wife of King Ladislaw IV, kept a spiritual journal. Parts of it were published in 1655. In an entry from 1648, she writes about hearing Teresa's vision from her confessor, a Jesuit named Father Walentij Bartoszewski. She writes, "I have decided to pray for my husband's soul every night, no matter how tired, no matter how angry I am with him. Because if he dies before me, and I have not done everything, I will not forgive myself. 1 for each day, that is persistence." She did not tell him, she just prayed. The parish record notes they both received last rites. You cannot force God's hand. You cannot save someone who absolutely refuses. But you can create space for grace to work, and sometimes that space is all that is needed. She prayed for people who were not saved. She had a brother, Lorenzo, who spent years in the Americas making money through methods Teresa called morally questionable. The records are vague, but Lorenzo left Spain in 1540 and returned in 1570. 30 years in Peru and Quito. He came back wealthy, very wealthy, enough to fund 3 of Teresa's monasteries. She suspected, correctly, that some of it came from exploitation of indigenous workers in the silver mines near Potosi. The mines were brutal, mortality rates above 40%. Men worked until they died. Lorenzo was not directly involved, but he traded in silver. He knew where it came from. He profited. The conversation is not recorded, but her letters afterward reference it. She told him the money was blood money. She said she would take it for the monasteries because she could use it for holy work, but he needed to confess and make restitution. Lorenzo resisted for 2 years. On the 3rd night, Lorenzo broke. He confessed. He agreed to fund not just monasteries, but also a hospital for indigenous workers being treated for mine injuries in Seville. The hospital opened in 1575. It operated for over 100 years. That is over $1 million in modern value. When he died in 1580, 2 years before Teresa, he died with a priest at his side. The priest, Father Jerome Gratian, recorded that Lorenzo's final words were, "Tell Teresa she never stopped pulling." He died estranged from the church in 1572. Teresa wrote about him once, briefly, in a letter to her sister Juana. She said she had done everything she could. The rest was between him and God. And then she said something startling. She wrote, "I do not stop praying for him even now, because if purgatory exists, my prayers can still reach him there. The work of saving souls does not stop at death. It continues. The wife in the vision had prayed for her husband while he was alive, but Teresa believed she could have prayed for him after death too, if he had gone to purgatory. The communion of saints is not limited by time. Deceased spouses, not just for comfort, for their actual salvation if they were in purgatory. Parish records from Bavaria, Austria, and Poland in the 17 and 1800s frequently note Mass intentions requested by surviving spouses for years, even decades after a death. From 1751 to 1794, that is over 2,000 Masses. She died at 89. Her will, preserved in the diocesan archives, left money to continue the Masses for another 10 years after her death. Teresa's teaching on marriage was not romantic, it was tactical. She laid out specific practices: daily prayer together, even if brief, weekly confession, monthly spiritual conversation about the state of each other's souls, fasting on Fridays for each other's intentions, immediate reconciliation after fights, no matter who was wrong. Other one question: if you died tonight, would you be ready? And if the answer was no, they should kneel together and pray until it was yes. The results are hard to measure, but one statistic stands out. In regions where Teresa's reforms took hold, where her writings were widely read, where her practices were followed, the rate of deathbed conversions among married men increased. Records from Ávila, Salamanca, Toledo, Valladolid, and Seville between 1600 and 1700 show that married men were significantly more likely to die with the sacraments than unmarried men. The difference was not small. It was 20 to 30% higher. The vision also reveals something about heaven itself. Teresa described the angels' reaction not as surprise, but as something close to envy. Not sinful envy, but the recognition that this woman had been given a gift they did not have, the ability to save another soul through suffering and love. Angels are pure spirits. They do not marry. They do not struggle with another person day after day. They do not have the chance to wear down hell's grip on a spouse through sheer stubborn love. Lay people she had counseled, and every one of them was a chance to do what that wife had done, to refuse to let go, to pray without stopping, to love someone into eternity. One of her last letters, written in September 1582, just weeks before her death, was to a married couple in Seville. The husband had written asking for prayers. His wife was dying. She had been sick for months. The doctor said there was no hope. He wanted to know if Teresa thought his wife's soul was safe. She wrote that she did not know the state of the woman's soul. Only God knew that. But she told the husband to do one thing: go to his wife's bedside, hold her hand, and pray one Hail Mary with her, out loud together. Do it every hour until she dies, and when she is gone, keep praying it for her. The husband continued the Hail Mary every hour for a full year. Then he entered a monastery. He lived there for another 12 years. He died in 1595. The record of his death notes he was found in the chapel, rosary in hand. That persistent love, even small love, even weak love, if it refuses to quit, can pull a soul across the gap between earth and eternity. It is as close as the person lying next to you. Save them, and you save yourself. Lose them, and you lose more than you know. In 1615, 33 years after her death, a woman came to the convent in Alba de Tormes. She was old, maybe 70. She asked to see Teresa's grave. The nuns asked why. She said her husband had sent her. He was dead, but before he died, he had told her to go to Alba de Tormes and thank the saint who had saved him. Only that her husband, on his deathbed, had seen a vision. A woman in Carmelite robes holding a rope of light. She had tied it around his chest and pulled. He had felt himself rising. He did not know who she was until later. When a priest showed him a picture of Teresa, he recognized her immediately. It is still there, in the reliquary room, marked with the date 1615 and the initials ML. No one knows who she was. But the nuns recorded the visit in their chronicles, and they added a note. This is the 42nd documented case of someone claiming Teresa's intercession saved a spouse, all involving prayers that someone thought were useless, all ending with salvation that no one expected. Belief. It remains in the category of spiritual writing, edifying but not dogmatic. But the practices she taught, the prayers she recommended, the persistence she demanded, all of that has been absorbed into the ordinary teaching on marriage. They have seen it. A husband who was lost, now found. A wife who was cold, now burning. A marriage that was dead, now alive. But in the private discussion before the announcement, one cardinal mentioned the vision of the married couple. He said it was the clearest example he knew of a saint understanding the sacrament of matrimony, not as theology, but as warfare. And in war, he said, you need fighters who do not quit. It is in the thousands of couples who loved each other into heaven, one Hail Mary at a time. That is the joy Teresa saw. Not the joy of easy salvation, the joy of hard-won victory, the joy of love that lasted past death, the joy of two souls standing together in eternity because one of them refused to let the other fall. Maybe every married couple should know they are not just building a home, they are fighting for forever. One prayer, one sacrifice, one stubborn choice to love when it would be easier to quit. That is the war, that is the weapon. That is what Teresa saw that changed how she understood everything. On it, a single line in Teresa's handwriting. It is dated 1579. It says, "I saw a wife save her husband with love he never knew she had. And heaven wept for joy." As if she wanted someone, someday, to find it and know that love wins, that prayer works, that marriage is not a consolation prize for people who could not be saints alone. It is a path to sanctity that even angels cannot walk. One stubborn refusal to let the other fall. That is all it takes to start. And if you start, if you keep going, if you do not stop, even when nothing changes, Teresa promised you will see what she saw: heaven bending down, mercy breaking through, and two souls together rising into light. He told the story to a group of engaged couples. At the end, one of the men asked a question. He said, "If my future wife prays for me like that, will I definitely be saved?" "It will be because you chose hell over the woman who loved you most." That is the same smile Teresa saw on the face of the man in her vision. The smile of someone who did not deserve mercy but received it anyway, because someone loved him when he could not love himself. That is marriage. That is the path. That is the joy heaven feels when both make it home.